Good day, folks, and welcome to the Anorak Review Show with your host, the Anorak. Time to once again cover an album by the Electric Light Orchestra. So far, we've covered both a few well-known albums and obscure ones, such as their eponymous debut album, or No Answer for the Americans out there because of a missed call, the big hit album, A New World Record, the even bigger hit album, Out of the Blue, the sci-fi synth rock opera Time, and an attempt at returning back to basics with Zoom. But now, let's go back to the beginning. Again. Sort of. After the release of their first album back in December 1971, and their first concert in April 1972, the members of ELO went to begin work on their next record. However, at some point into recording, founding member Roy Wood soon decided to leave the band due to creative disagreements with their manager at the time, Don Arden, taking keyboardist and French horn player Bill Hunt, as well as late cellist Hugh McDowell, with him to form another new band called Wizard. And you probably know them for their 1973 one-hit Christmas wonder, I Wish It Could Be Christmas Every Day. And then that band barely lasted a few years, having released like 2 or 3 albums from 1973 to 74, before eventually disbanding by the autumn of 75, likely due to a combination of financial difficulties and minimal commercial success beyond that Christmas song. Soon afterwards, Roy, along with fellow Move/Wizard member, the late bassist Rick Price, formed yet another new band called Wizzo Band, in which they lasted a few more years, released one album, and split up again in 1978. Of course. But let's get back to ELO and this album here. While it continues the raw, experimental sound of its predecessor, it contrasts in that Jeff Lynne is credited in composing all the tracks. Well, most of them at least, I'll get to that in a moment. And the tracks here are extensively long compared to the conventionally shorter songs of the album prior, and possibly since. This is definitely bringing this more into the progressive rock category. But right now, let's jump into ELO's 1973 album, simply titled ELO 2. I'll admit, as you can see, this copy I have here isn't the most ideally conditioned or preserved, showing its age on all sides, and even ripped immensely on one of them. But with an album that's 50 years old like this, it shouldn't be too much of a surprise. Even still, the LP record inside is still safe and playable, so not a complete waste and loss here. Anyways, the cover itself is actually pretty interesting. Its artwork is done once again by the folks of Hypnosis, who also did the first album's cover art, and possibly next week's album artwork. Continuing the light bulb motif, it features said light bulb floating endlessly and aimlessly in the somewhat colourful void of space. The space theme does seem like a precursor to the Out of Blue album and its cover artwork. I dare even say it's interesting and even a bit eerie how similar they are, right down to having the band name in the upper corner. It might be coincidence, but considering how Jeff Lynne and Richard Tandy are credited for the cover's concepts, anything's likely. But let's actually delve into the actual music itself, shall we? We begin the album with In Old England Town, Boogie Number 2. And boy does it have quite the opening, as we're immediately thrust into the sounds of raw, soaring cellos in a stomping rhythm like a gigantic monster marching to the scene, along with fast, screechy, frantic violin strings as if they're running from said monster. Speaking of giant monsters, I hope Maze is doing well in his hunt for that Noah Titan. I'm sure he'll be fine. Said multi-layered cellos are done by the late Mike Edwards and presumably Roy Wood and Hugh McDowell as well, despite neither being credited in my copy. And the violins are done by the also late Wilfred Gibson. And all this is enhanced by the Moog synthesizer of keyboardist Richard Tandy, who makes his proper debut here as a full-on ELO member, having to play bass for their first lineup in concert. Tandy himself would eventually be the only ever constantly occurring member of the band besides Lynn himself, even to this day as far as I know. We also get Bev Bevan showing off some prog rock influences with the way he rolls his drums. Although he already strums away on his electric guitar, it only takes over a minute and 40 seconds into the song before we get good old Jeff Lynne singing his vocal chords, albeit just as raw as he was in the first album, as if he was still developing his iconic and recognizable voice by then. Down, down, you can see them all rising gaily to the top. The most epic and most whimsical rock climbing contest you will ever see. Keep on rising, babe. You know you got a long drop. You better cling because it's the done thing. Yeah, we couldn't afford one more harness, and you drew the short straw, so if you fall, tell the Reaper I said hi. Down, down, at the policeman's ball, they're all dancing in a line. The secret policeman's ball is off to a stranger start than I might have expected. Keep on grunting, boys. You know you're doing fine. Come quickly, I've been strangled. Oh wait, never mind. I was just choking on an ice cube from the punch I was drinking. False alarm, ladies and gentlemen. I snuck some more, but honestly, the lyrics here are quite interesting, if not challenging to analyse, so make of that if you will. The song as a whole is still cool and fun to listen to. Jeff Lynne still shows his Beatles influence in both his vocals and the music itself. Plus, it's unique how he dealt with the song as long as this when he would normally do short ones. And speaking of, this is in fact the shortest track on the album, and it's just less than 7 minutes. I wasn't kidding either earlier. Next, we get to Mama, where we get calmer strings this time round, including a cello from Colin Walker, who basically joined in after Roy and Hugh left. Here, Jeff does seem to sing an actual narrative of sorts, about a lonely girl who had travelled many days with a lonely heart who couldn't find a way. An owner of a lonely heart, if you will. She came up from the country with a smile for everyone and left her blue horizon just to find another home. Which is a bit of a shame though, that Chrysler Horizon car was a nice hatchback. Then Jeff sings the song's chorus, where he, or she, calls to Mama, about how it's a hard life to carry on now she's gone, implying that said mother had passed away recently. I feel I'm a fool who lost it all. You used to make it all very so clear. You used to help me out whenever I got stuck in a level on Call of Duty. That life must go on, though the end is near. It's a sad and lonely life. I know I had a similar feeling when I learned that my uncle was discontinued years ago. He then goes on to sing about a misty morning rider wandering through the hills. So, either Gandalf the Grey or Lady Galadriel. You make the call. And a wandering soul appearing over rainy windowsills. So, even in the early years and before stuff like Concerto for a Rainy Day, Jeff still wrote about rain, especially in sad songs like this one. In the midst of the track, we hear what sounds like a fiddle playing, likely by Wilfred Gibson though it could be inaccurate and I could be miscrediting there. Feel free to correct me on that one. The song itself is honestly another one of many underrated tracks from the ELO back catalogue. It's bittersweet lyrics and equally bittersweet music that combines soft classical charms with a soft rock beat, not only shine through, but also serves as a precursor for many ELO tracks in the years to come. Side 1 ends with an excellent and very clever cover of the Chuck Berry classic Roll Over Beethoven, which wouldn't be the first time an English rock band covered this particular American blues song. Almost a decade prior, in 1963, the Beatles did their own cover for their second album with the Beatles, which I hope I'll get to later this year eventually. And since Jeff is an open fan of the Beatles, it's expected he'd do a similar version as well. Except this one is quite unique in certain ways. After opening with a quiet yet ominous synth bit or possibly a harmonium, we get the instantly recognizable opening string chords of Beethoven's Symphony No. 5, as it goes on for a little while. Then soon enough, we're suddenly greeted by the Chuck Berry-esque guitar breaking in to kick up a notch some things, making this quite unpredictable, especially if you were to listen to this for the very first time. So, yeah, ironically or not, ELO's version of Roll Over Beethoven actually integrates certain parts of a Beethoven composition, and a very famous one of that. So not only is it a version of Roll Over Beethoven, but also Beethoven's Fifth Symphony as well. So basically, it's the original mashup, before mashups were even be a thing on places like YouTube. Like with the previous two songs, this one's length is very well due to the extended instrumental sections all throughout in between the vocal bits. Again, emphasizing the prog rock vibe at the time. Being a cover version, the lyrics here seem to remain mostly intact and unaltered, as far as I know at least. Gonna write a little letter, gonna mail it to my local DJ. It's a jumping little record, I want my jockey to play. I believe it's Flowers by Miley Cyrus. Nah, it's actually Roll Over Beethoven, of course. Not often when a song breaks the fourth wall and mentions its own name as well as its own existence as a song. It's like having a VHS tape where the content of it is basically someone trying to watch that very same VHS tape. Assuming it's not the Ring tape. My temperature's rising, the jukebox blowing a fuse. Or that could be the thermostat being turned very hot. Who's been playing around with that? My heart's beating a rhythm, singing out rhythm and blues. Or at least I think that's what it's singing. It could also be Heart Skips a Beat by Ollie Murs. Also, interestingly enough, the US release of this cover song is actually slightly longer than the UK release, being about 1 minute and 6 seconds longer, making it up to around 8 minutes and 9 seconds in total. Why this was a case to begin with, I've frankly no idea, to be honest. Especially even if you were to listen to both back to back, you're likely to miss any noticeable differences or anything else out of place or in of place. But upon further comparisons, the US version has a few more keyboard bits sprinkled throughout the instrumental bridges, plus an extra piano solo like something out of Little Richard, which is fine by even a Brit like me, the longer the better. Overall, while I appreciate Chuck Berry's original version as well as the Beatles' own cover, I definitely enjoy Jeff Lynne's interpretation. I dare even say I kind of enjoy it the best out of the three. It's a tribute to both Chuck and Ludwig, and I could imagine someone like Alex from A Clockwork Orange listening to this version, being the big Ludwig van Beethoven fanboy that he is. Although, since that Lord Gambler guy has been sending various fictional villains to invade this earth as we speak, I have to wonder if Alex DeLarge is involved in there too. Anyway, moving on. Side 1 begins with From the Sun to the World, Boogie No. 1. The only other track on this album to presumably have Roy, Hugh and Bill to an extent. Starting off with a little piano and synth melody which Richard plays with sweet serenity, before 40 seconds in as the drum and cello strings return to join the rhapsody with a little bit of gusto. Then Jeff soon sings once more, sounding more like his familiar voice that we would hear in following albums. "Listen to me, sister, I got news from the governor. He wishes to let you know that the movie you wanted to see had just been postponed for another few months." And he heard people shouting from the towers in the city while their babies grow in test tubes overnight. Turns out they actually had test tube aliens. Does anyone remember those? I certainly do. Jeff then says to run and fetch the priest because there's a light on in the building. Basically, the priest forgot to turn off the lights in the house before leaving, so he's just wasting electricity bills. And there's sounds blowing out in the music of the night, and we should try to get the people out alive. He has a point, though, after all. No sane human being should ever have to suffer under the music of Creed. After those two verses, we get another instrumental section where we hear more of the cello and violins over the synthesizers and drums, before things start to crumble down into near silence for but a brief moment, a brief while, before things ease back up again with that soothing piano and presumably a French horn as well, being played by Bill Hunt. Then the violins join back in as well to play a rather somber solo for a while before turning bright again with the other instruments. Then, at the halfway point, the song kicks into a rocking piano and drum rhythm, almost similar to the opening of the Grease song, "You're the One That I Want." I'm expecting Olivia Newton-John to show up and sing a duet with Jeff Lynne. Which, funny enough, they would do just that for the soundtrack of the film Xanadu. Anyway, we get another reprise of the main boogie theme of this song before Jeff sings the next two more verses. Moving across the ocean with the flag of death flying, the demon butcher pointing out the message on the tide, and the demon lights sailing at his side. I guess they're searching for the holy diver, who's been down too long in the midnight sea. Storming down the airwaves comes the protest and the praying. Insert your own protest joke here. And the love that shone down from the sun to the world no longer could support the light it gave. I like how these two boogies are named after certain random lines in the verses, especially near the end. In Old England Town and From the Sun to the World. Though, with the full verse in context, I guess love is a finite resource and we had used it up quite fast. Or it could be the sun itself kind of being used up. Could someone refill that sun, please? Anyone? Then, in the climax to this 8-minute tune, we get a hard, delicious guitar solo, possibly the most hardcore Jeff has probably gotten, whether on ELO or solo or guest appearances, etc. It's screechy, while also hyperactive like something Elvis Presley would do. I kinda like it. And we soon get to come down to a rockin' and rollin' closer like any good hard rock and roll track of the 50s or ever since then would. It's daft, but you gotta love it for that alone. And so, our album ends with the epic yet tragic Kuiama. This may well be ELO at their proggiest, especially with its length. And in an album that's already filled with long tracks, that may say something. Not counting Concerto for a Rainy Day, which even then is technically a suite of 4 songs arranged around a particular theme, this may be the longest ELO track to date, at 11 minutes and 19 seconds. And bear in mind, this is still very early in the band's history. Think about that. But for the music itself, it starts off with a somewhat ominous, brassy sounding keyboard playing a theme or leitmotif that would occur more than once across the song. Then, that gets immediately contrasted by a rather calm and welcoming steel-less guitar before we get the main general melody and rhythm. The lyrical content is likely inspired by the Vietnam War that was going on at the time. Jeff sings from the perspective of a soldier meeting and talking to an orphaned girl named Kuiama, whose parents were killed in a conflict. She smiled, but the tears on her little face showed the pain that had been in that far-off place. It's more likely that Kuiama has some PTSD as a result of said conflict, and while she tries to hide it with a smile, she's unable to hold back the tears that show the trauma that she's suffering from. Soon, the soldier finds her and tries to reach for her, to say how your ma and pa passed away, and they left you to wander the ruin and decay. So, basically, Kuiama had been left alive and alone to wander aimlessly through various homes and places wrecked and destroyed by war. That has got to be messed up, man. After a repeat of the opening leitmotif, Jeff the soldier goes to meet Kuiama and tell her that 10,000 miles are a long way and you're here today, while assuring her that there are no bombs falling and no horsemen in the night riding through your dreams to tear at your life. In a bridge section, the soldier promises Kuiama of the land of which he's from, that there's no silver rain to hit the ground. Jeff sure does love to sing about rain, don't he? No more guns to be sound, no more lives to be drowned, and no trenches where men would die beneath the big black sky. But soon, the soldier has something else to tell Kuiama. A few things, in fact. In the country Kuiama lives in, they got rules with no reason. They teach you to kill and send you away with a gun in hand. This could likely be alluding to child soldiers or just how a lot of people in general are raised and trained to be ruthless killers in the battlefields. Following this, we get an extended instrumental section where we get to really hear some brilliant music from the various instruments, from the guitars, the violins, the pianos, etc., all playing together in such fantastic and epically emotional grand scale. This lasts for over 4 minutes, taking up the middle third of the entire track, as if this represents the soldier's struggling thoughts, feelings, and fears, his hesitance of confessing something to Kuiama. There's quite a bit about this to think about, really. Until at last, he finally reveals the truth to Kuiama, telling her to believe him, even when he's overwhelmed with fear of having to fight and kill. He's been given a gun and has a duty that he owed to his fatherland, so he made his stand. That truth is, he was the one who shot Kuiama's parents. Whether by accident and misfire or that he deliberately opened fire on them and only now feels guilt and regret over that action is left a mystery and to listeners' interpretations. The final line of the song, Kuiama, she waits for me there, true blue, you saw it through, seems to imply that Kuiama herself actually witnessed the shooting right then and there, almost just like what happened with the Waynes. And she just blocked out the recent and traumatic memory, just somewhere deep in her subconscious, or just conscious. And the last 2 minutes go out on quite a gut-wrenching finale, just as much like the ending of Mr. Blue Sky or Wild West Hero. The music just implodes and explodes all together until there's nothing left but a synth-produced sound drifting away. The way the music and the lyrics end are also quite ambiguous, that we don't exactly get to know or find out what happens soon after the soldier confesses to the girl, how she reacts and all that. And I can't help but commend that. Leave it to the listeners to think about it for themselves, how things would turn out. Personally, I like to think that the soldier decided to adopt the orphan to take good care and protect her, hopefully to make amends for what he had done. or give her to an orphanage. That's just as likely as well too. If you want to read more into the song and its interpretation, there's a page on Reddit that offers an in-depth analysis into its lyrics and narrative, which I'll link to in the description if you're curious enough to check that out. It's honestly quite good and compelling and offers some good insight into the song itself. As for this album, it's honestly quite underrated. Mind you, it was still in the early days of ELO, so they hadn't quite perfected their iconic sounds and styles and were still experimenting at the time, especially since Roy had just left the band during the making of said album. But it's still interesting in spite of that, or rather because of it. The two boogies in Old England Town and From the Sun to the World are dramatic as they are hard-rocking. The cover of Roll Over Beethoven is a fantastic and clever take that incorporates the iconic Fifth Symphony and does a fine good job of that. And the other tracks, Mama and Kuiama, are beautiful, melodic ballads where Jeff gets to express his more emotional sides. If you're into the Electric Light Orchestra, or you're just curious about their earlier, lesser-known albums, I say check out this one and see how you think. But for those who have listened to it already before, what do you think of it? Do you think it's a step up and natural progression from their debut album? And what album in ELO's lineup do you think was when they actually reached and perfected their sound and style? And what will be your favourite ELO album? Let me know your views in the comment section below. Next time, we have something even more special. It's been long overdue, but it's finally come. The belated 50th anniversary of one of the most influential and best-selling albums in the history of rock in all of music in general. And I'll be seeing you there.